Looking at Chapter 11, Section 4, I want to address the Schnick versus the U.S. Supreme Court case that happened in 1919. Basically, Schnick had leaflets that were against the draft, and in this, the equation with the draft was that it was a deed against the humanity. The court ruled against Schnick's leaflets and stated basically that in wartime, the First Amendment rights aren't guaranteed. Now turning our attention with President Wilson, he presented his plan, his 14 points, to Congress. And what we have is that Wilson's plan for world peace following World War I. The Allies rejected a peaceful plan. First, there was no secret treaties proposed. 2, freedom of seas. 3, the fostering of free trade. And 4, reducing the military. 4, or the fifth item in his 14th plan, was to have colonial policies reflect the colony and imperialists. The 6th through the 13th point dealt with land boundaries, and then the 14th point was the creation of the League of Nations, which was an international organization to address diplomatic crises. And that was a huge contention in America. The Allies reject Wilson's plan, and those people who were involved in the Treaty of Versailles were the Big Four, were to work it out without the Central Powers or without Russia. The Big Four were Wilson of the United States, Clement of France, Lloyd George of Britain, and Orlando of Italy. The Allies were angry at Germany, and they wanted to prevent another invasion of France. That is why the 14 points was rejected on a world level. On the U.S. level, it was rejected because of the League of Nations. The U.S. Senate did not want to entangle America into those alliances that, in essence, we saw start World War I. The Treaty of Versailles was debatable. It was actually signed in June of 1919. However, the U.S. never signed the Treaty of Versailles. I'm going to back up one. When we're looking at the Treaty of Versailles established 9 new nations. And you can see some of them. Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia. And when we look at that, the Ottoman Empire was divided into 5 areas and became under France or Britain control, or colonies. Another thing with the treaty was that Germany could not have an army. It had to return a region to France, and it had to pay the Allies reparations, or war debt, basically. The treaty's weaknesses, one of the major ones was that it didn't treat all nations fairly, including Germany. As you can imagine, the Allies were still extremely upset with Germany and the cruelty that they implemented. Looking at the forcing of Germany to accept sole responsibility for starting World War I, we see in the War Guilt Clause. Another weakness was that Russia, who again was an ally, lost most men and lost most territory than Germany, and the Soviet Union wanted its land back. Note I said Soviet Union because Russia, under the Tsar, was, as it was known, and then the Bolsheviks took over and created the Soviet Union. The Treaty of Versailles ignored the claims of colonized people for self-determination, and when we look at that, that is a huge weakness and probably will create many entanglements when we look at some of the Asian wars that the U.S. becomes involved. Who opposed the treaty? Americans believed that the treaty was too harsh. They had ethnic reasons, economic reasons, and imperialism still was in place. It just swapped imperialists. So some of the colonies were just transferred from one control to the other control. The huge issue in America was the League of Nations. That was the main domestic opposition. Many senators felt that isolation threatened, and that isolation was threatened, and world involvement in the foreign conflicts was not something that the U.S. wanted to strive for. Henry Cabot Lodge was the head of the conservative senators who were suspicious of the provisions for joint economic and military action, and they were against aggression, wanted Congress's constitutional right to declare war in the treaty, and that never did happen. There was just a huge mistrust between. Wilson fought in the U.S. to be in the League of Nations, and he almost died trying to get it passed. Again, the U.S. never signed the Treaty of Versailles and did not join the League of Nations, feared it would shape U.S. foreign policy, and therefore U.S. signed its own armistice with Germany, its own treaty with Germany. And then we see the legacy of the war. What happened after the World War? America emerged as a powerful industrial military country. Bitterness throughout Europe, specifically Italy, Russia, Germany, Spain, saw political changes, and the Treaty of Versailles settled nothing. Again, we talk about trying to establish dominance in the world. U.S. succeeded in that. It actually became an economic giant. However, with the U.S. signing the separate treaty with Germany, at that time, it led to many Germans to support Adolf Hitler because of the political instability of the country and the violence in the country, and the resentment of Germany's treatment by the Allies. And if you recall, Adolf Hitler was a major influence in World War II. And that's what we'll be looking at later in the course. So the Treaty of Versailles, as some things looked good on paper, however, it didn't help calm harsh feelings in Europe. And that ends Chapter 11, Section 4.